Thank you for joining us today for State of the Firearms Industry and Future of Military Tech. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Jack Carr, a New York Times best-selling author and former Navy SEAL sniper. He is the author of The Terminal List, True Believer, Savage Son, and The Devil's Hand. His fifth novel, In the Blood, will be released in 2022. The Amazon Prime television series adaptation of his first novel, The Terminal List, starring Chris Pratt, is scheduled to premiere also in 2022. We will be answering a couple audience questions after this, so please use the Q&A function that you'll see on the top right of the chat. Please join me in welcoming Jack Carr. Thank you for being with us today, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I think logging into this was probably the most stressful thing I've done since Ramadi 0506, but we made it. We made it. So I'm in.
Sincerest apologies. And like I said, someone spammed out the LinkedIn page. So people have been writing to me and going off to India. So the floor is yours. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. So I figured I'd give a little background and hit a couple points and then open it up for questions. So and I much prefer the questions because then you know that at least one person that's listening is interested in what you have to say. But by way of background, I grew up knowing what I wanted to do with my life, which is looking back on it, I'm very grateful for that I was had this just innate desire to serve my country from an early age. And I think that's because I grew up around the pictures, medals, wings that from my grandfather in World War II. He was a Marine, killed off Okinawa in 1945, May of 1945. And so I just knew I was always going to follow that path and serve my country. And then very early on, I found out about SEALs. And back in the early 80s, mid 80s, you couldn't just obviously log on and go down a rabbit hole and spend the rest of your life researching special operations. You had to go to the library and you had to actually put in the work and do some research, look up magazine articles, look up newspaper articles, read a chapter in a book that mentioned special operations. And a lot of it back then was focused on the Vietnam experience from Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Marine snipers, that sort of a thing. So I just knew that path. And then once I expired, when I made my way through all of that nonfiction, guess what? There was the fiction side of the house. And a lot of the protagonists back then in the 80s and 90s had Vietnam experience. So novels by Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden, a lot of their main characters were Army Special Forces, were Navy SEALs, were CIA special operators in Vietnam, that sort of a thing. So I just loved reading, and I knew that after my time in the military that I would write thrillers. So that's by way of background. That's how I got to be sitting here today. But because I know this forum is really focused on, I think, veterans and veterans transitioning from military service to the private sector, particularly on the defense industry side of the house. What I saw as I got near to leaving the military, and I was very fortunate in that I went to BUDS, which is our SEAL Training Command, and I had a couple of years to take a breath and figure out my next move. And I knew what that was going to be, writing thrillers. So I didn't go right from one deployment and then all of a sudden the next day be in the private sector type of a thing. I had a little bit of time to watch other people getting out of the military, identify a few issues that they had leaving the military, and then figure out a way to avoid some of those hazards. And it doesn't really have to be the military. For other people that are on this chat and on this video from other industries, it can be anything in life. It's just a transition. It doesn't have to be special operations. It can be anything. It can be a divorce, can be death of a loved one, can be getting fired from a job, can be deciding just to leave one job and move on to another, to start your own business, whatever it might be. There are transitions in life, and we're all going to take hits as we make these transitions or as we go through life. It's just part of the deal. So don't expect not to get knocked down. But what I noticed when people were leaving the military in particular is that they had a hard time doing that because they tried to recreate what they had in the military. And I realized that, hey, you're not going to ever be able to recreate in the private sector what you had in Najaf 04, what you had in Ramadi 05, 06, what you had in Baghdad 06, or wherever it was. It's going to be different. And you can use those experiences, whether they're good or bad, and build on that foundation to move forward. But the key was trying to identify that next mission in life and that purpose in life, and combining those two things moving forward. So I knew my mission in life was to take care of my family. My passion was writing moving forward. And so I tried to combine those on the way out as I created this next life for me and my family going forward. So it's all about building on those foundations. And then it's also about leadership, because whether you're an E1 and in charge of just yourself, essentially, and are just a sponge trying to soak it all in, or maybe you're an E3 and maybe you have one person that's that you're mentoring along or that's working for you. Maybe you're an E6 and you're an LPO, or maybe you're a chief and you have a platoon, or maybe you're a senior chief and you have a troop, or maybe you're a master chief and you have an entire team. And same thing on the officer side of the house. It doesn't matter if you're in charge of just yourself or 300 people or 600 people. It's still all about that leadership, that trust, building that trust up and down the chain, and that transitions directly over into the private sector, whether you are starting your own business and have one employee, whether you have 0 employees, whether you're just a leader within your family, your community, it doesn't matter. It's still all about that building that trust with that circle, with those around you up and down the chain. And the way you do that is through those honest assessments. And people can tell, especially today, if you're building a business and using social channels to do that, podcast, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, those sorts of things, your audience, in my case, our readership, they know for sure if you are not being yourself. And so that honesty and that building that trust with a readership or with whatever you're building out there remains of vital importance. And the last thing I'll say here, there was something that was passed on to me when I was a junior officer, and I started enlisted, so did 6.5 years as an enlisted SEAL, then became an officer, and then finished the rest of my 20 years in the military as an officer in the SEAL teams. But early on, I had a commanding officer who passed on these 4 battlefield expectations, and he went to Afghanistan right after 9/11, and he was deployed there for a year with one of our top tier special operations units. And we hadn't been involved in sustained combat operations really since Vietnam. We'd had flashpoints here and there with Grenada, Panama, Mogadishu, Desert One, and so we had these flashpoints, but they weren't sustained combat operations. So he's been there for a year. He's seen different elements rotate through Afghanistan, and he brought these 4 battlefield expectations back to us as his next SEAL team as he took over as commanding officer. And they work on the battlefield, and I think they work in life as well. So I just want to pass these along. And I won't say his name because he's still active and he's still out there and he's still doing the job. But he said, always improve your fighting position. So whether that's in life, whether it's in an ambush, whatever it is, always try to improve that fighting position. 2, he said, exploit all technical and tactical advantages. 3, he said, push SA. And for anyone not military, SA is situational awareness. And it essentially just means information. So push situational awareness, push information, both up and down the chain of command, because you have to build that picture for those that are allocating assets to you while you're in the field. And the 4th one, and most important to me, he said, in the absence of orders or direction on the battlefield, take charge and lead. So with that, let's open it up for some questions.
All righty. Okay, thank you so much for that. We just have one quick question, and they wanted to know, what's it like to work with Chris Pratt?
I love that question. He has been fantastic, and I didn't know what to expect really stepping into that realm in Hollywood. But what I found when I first showed up there on set was just how similar it was to a military operation. So I showed up on set for the first time, and it was Paramount Studios, and all this history around. It's incredible. 350 people on set, and my first thought was, wow, this is just like the military. You have people here that are so good at their specific jobs. In the military, you have a logistics chain, and you have to feed the troops. Well, guess what? Craft Food Services is feeding the troops on set, those 350 people. So they have that. In a platoon, you have a breacher in charge of all the explosives and that sort of a thing. Well, guess what? There's an explosives guy on set dealing with all the explosives and the safety and all the rest of that. There's an armorer, just like in a SEAL platoon or a SEAL troop, that's in charge of making sure those weapons are accounted for before and after each mission and everything's working and all that sort of a thing. that person's on set too. And there's a mobility person on set. And that mobility person, just like in a SEAL platoon or SEAL troop, in charge of all vehicles, making sure they're up and running and where they need to be at the right time, gassed up, all ready to go. And everyone's working together. And then you have Antoine Fuqua and Chris Pratt at the top, and they're like the commanding officer and the troop commander for the military people out there. So they're setting the tone for everyone else. And people in the military, as you know, you have good leadership and bad leadership. And in this case, outstanding leadership from Antoine Fuqua, the director, and from Chris Pratt. And so they're at the top, and you just want to be around those guys. You want to be involved. You want to be helping. You want to be doing your best work for them and that entire team. So what I noticed is that it's really similar to the military in how that operation was run. And we did 8 episodes, and they launched sometime here in 2022. But Chris was amazing, absolutely incredible, very comfortable around the weapons and that sort of thing. So that helped. So we didn't have to just start from zero. And we had SEALs on set, so it was like a reunion every time I went out there. Guys that I was in the SEAL teams with, guys that I deployed with, are technical advisors on set, or actually acting in it, or as a producer in it. So every time I showed up on set, it was like a reunion, and it was a fantastic experience. And Chris was amazing.
Awesome. Okay. Well, everyone, please take note. I pinned a very special link at the top of the chat so you can request a free paperback edition of Jack Carr's debut thriller, The Terminal List. So everyone, let's hit up the emojis. Round of applause for Jack. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, week, holiday season. Keep kicking ass, and then we'll be all tuning into Amazon, of course, to watch your thriller.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, and everybody else out there. Take care, stay safe, keep fighting.
Thank you very much.